Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to today's episode of Voice of Istiqlal, where we talk about conversations relevant to the Uyghur cause. We invite Uyghurs, we invite non-Uyghur scholars, academics, experts, and activists to talk about Uyghurs and what they're going through in today's day and age, suffering at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Today we're going to be talking about the Starvation Genocide in East Turkestan, and we have three special guests with us from continents. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. We have Mr. Nurmuhammad Majid, who is the president of the East Turkestan Human Rights Watch Association, coming in from Australia. We have Hamza Andreas Tzortzis, who is a writer, researcher, and founder of the Sapience Institute. And we have Amal Altareb, who is executive director and co-founder of Free Uyghur Now, which is based in New York in the USA. Assalamu alaikum to you all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for joining us today. My first question to Brother Nurmuhammad, can you just tell us more about, briefly, East Turkestan Human Rights Association, Human Rights Watch Association, get the viewers to understand what it's about?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this episode. And please, I also convey my greetings on behalf of the Uyghur people living abroad and inside of East Turkestan, who is eagerly waiting to reach their voices to the international communities. East Turkestan Human Rights Watch Association is established in Istanbul, Turkey, back in 2019. In order to achieve a more broad way of support from the international community, specifically inside Turkey and other relevant areas, Middle East and Arab Muslim countries, to the alarming cause of Uyghur people of East Turkestan from the human rights perspective. We are aiming to produce reputable, credible reports on the alarming issues of East Turkestan timely to raise credible awareness campaigns to the international community, plus that we reach to our relevant scholars, governments, or other NGOs to get more streamlined support on the human rights issues of the Uyghurs of East Turkestan. But the core value of our organizations is exactly the same as the national interests of Uyghur people. We are aiming to gain strong confidence for our people, and ultimately we are aiming to gain sovereign, free wills for our country and for our people. But in the last 3 years' time, we have been mainly working inside Turkey, in Turkey, I say officially. So basically producing numerous of reports in Turkish, Arabic, and English, and providing the wide range of readers or the other audiences to understand what is happening to our people back home, specifically from the human rights perspective, in coordination with the other international reports or other findings from the international academics or other NGOs and other institutions. We are also aiming to reach our voice, reach our activism, or reach our work scope to other countries through our direct dialogue, visits, or other campaign process in different countries as well.
Thank you very much. And same question to you, Sister Amal. Could you please tell us a bit about Free Uyghur Now, the coalition?
First of all, thank you, Dr. Salman, Brother Salman, and the Istiqlal network. So Free Uyghur Now, it's a student and mainly youth-led coalition with the main mission of advocating for the Uyghur people and Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. And we do that through social media campaigns, through political advocacy efforts. We are also part of the Coalition to End Uyghur Forced Labor, which is a coalition of more than 400 plus organizations, civil society organizations around the world, focusing specifically on companies that are complicit in Uyghur forced labor, but as well as how to push governments to pass laws to end kind of to pressure the companies to stop their complicity and to stop sourcing from the East Turkestan region country, inshallah soon. Um, um, yeah, like really our main kind of one of our main motivations as a student group or a youth-led group is there haven't been many Muslim voices, let's say, especially in the West or in the US, specifically, which is where we are based, who campaign and who are very outspoken on the Uyghur cause, as well as with our Uyghur brothers and sisters. Um, Most of our members are actually Muslim American students across university institutions in the US. So it's kind of our way of uh, doing the bare minimum while our countries and our people back home are either unable, and like as if for people are unable to speak. Countries are for reasons economic and others are silent on the genocide of the Uyghurs. So that's a bit of who we are. But thank you, brothers.
Thanks very much. You mentioned, we want to get into some of the conversations about that, the response from the Muslim world and what you, our guests, think about that today. But Amal mentioned, part of the Free Uyghur Now coalition is to get more and more Muslim voices speaking about it. And one such voice is Brother Hamza Tzortzis. Hamza, you've been speaking, on the international lecture circuit for many years now, and in recent months and years, you've become more and more vocal about the Uyghur genocide. What caused it to come under your radar, and what's been your response so far?
Well, first and foremost, Jazakallah khair for the opportunity, and Assalamu alaikum to everybody and all the brothers and sisters. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes the oppression and liberates our brothers and sisters and the people of East Turkestan. So, so basically, what the way I got involved in this was basically awareness. So, like yourselves, other groups and organizations and individuals were quite vocal about this, and it came to my radar, and then I access certain books. For example, there's a book by Ala Mam Timin, who is a philosophy postgraduate. He's got a PhD in philosophy, I believe, from Belgium, and he wrote the book called Worse Than Death: Reflections on the Uyghur Genocide. And there are another book on this issue as well. And I started to look into people's testimonies, and I felt that this was probably the number one problem that is facing the Ummah from a kind of, national perspective. Like, obviously, we don't like comparing atrocities, but if you think about it on multiple levels, 16,000 masajid destroyed since around 2017. You have 500,000 children removed from their parents. You have, over 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. You have the state-backed sanctioning of rape of our Uyghur sisters. You have forced sterilization, where the kind of fertility rates have dropped around 60% amongst the Uyghurs, and the national average is around 8%. Now you have the starvation. You have, the leaked report of the 4 breaks, breaking the connections, breaking the lineage, breaking the roots, breaking the kind of identity, which echoes another Chinese proverb, which is, if you break the roots, you get them extinct. So this is genocidal intent. Not only intent, but it's happening on the ground. And it's been happening for years. And when I realized this, and also it was like, in my view, a war against, moderate Islam, a war against normative Islam in terms of its symbols and its ideas, and an ethnic group who identify with those ideas. And I was like, this is unacceptable. Yeah, this is, genocide 101. And, I've been using my social media a lot, which is relatively large, to start promoting the relevant books and the ideas, and any one of you, Nurmuhammad, Sister Amal, use my social media, do what you want with it. It's all yours for the Uyghur cause. And we need to keep on pushing this. So I felt like awareness is the number one thing to do. It opens the door to other activities and actions. Personally, as our institute, what we're doing as well, we're starting to now translate. We've just found a really good translator that translates into simplified Chinese, Mandarin, and we're going to start producing some work that strategically helps the Uyghurs as well, especially from the point of view of our own objectives, which is to show that there is nothing wrong with Islam. There's nothing wrong with this. This is ideological warfare. You need to understand this. Obviously, there's actions that are going to be taking place that we're going to work with other groups and organizations, including yourself, Dr. Salman. There are thousands of Chinese students all around the world, and we know the CCP are fundamentally cowards and they're bullies and they're afraid of their own people. Although they need the students to go around the world in order to get intellectual capital, but they also spy on the students. So we should play on that weakness, and we should go to these students and actually tell them what's going on with regards to what Islam is about, what the Uyghurs are really about, and what is actually happening on the ground in China. So we could evoke some consciousness within them, so they can go back and, if needed, create social, economic, and political instability to basically help destroy the CCP. And I say that with pure intent, and we should do that. And and that's another campaign that we're going to be working on, and we're going to put resources and money and translations with regards to that. So the first booklet that we're doing is going to be aimed at Chinese students as well, which is going to, when they go back, it's going to help them take the Chinese to account if possible. So one of the main reasons I got involved because it was awareness, and I feel this is like one of the number one problems that we're facing at the moment. If we don't, as a community, not only as a Muslim community, but just as human beings who have a conscience, if we don't come together to solve this, then how we're going to solve any other problems? Because this is one of the biggest crises, humanitarian crisis. This is a genocide. Just think about if you were alive in the 1930s and 40s, knowing what you know now, and you were transported back into time, what would you do? Everyone would be like, yeah, I'll try and stop it. I'll sacrifice my life. It's happening now. CCP are a modern manifestation of Nazi Germany, and we just have to accept that, irrespective of the global economic power and how many Muslim nations are now have become enslaved by Sino-colonialism. We have to speak out, and we have to call a spade, and we have to show to people that actually there is a lot of economic and political power that the Muslim countries have and the global community has. They just have to stand in that possibility. They need to be a bit more assertive against the brutal policies of the CCP against our Uyghurs brothers and sisters.
Jazakallah khair. I mean, lots of good points mentioned there. Pick up on a few. Brother Nurmuhammad, Hamza mentioned among the different types of oppression that Uyghurs are facing, he mentioned Starvation Genocide, and this is something which is seeing more and more on social media. Uyghurs, getting their voice out about this. Can you explain what is Starvation Genocide and what's happening with regards to that in East Turkestan right now?
Thank you for this question. Starvations normally happens during the time of famine or other kind of conflict of the regions of the countries that we often hear. But the forced starvations forced by the Chinese state authorities happening in East Turkestan is a unique way of genocide, which is containing all the elements of other means of torturous persecution policies of the Chinese government. Because we are hearing the credible news or the voice of the Uyghur communities living in East Turkestan in particular areas. Specifically, the Uyghur communities are targeted by the Chinese government in the lockdown process, cutting the food access to the medicines, access to the social care, access to the general the other means of aids from the different region or different communities inside or outside of China, which is completely segmenting the Uyghur communities. Whereas the Chinese government is streamlining the coordinated way of support to the Chinese communities who are locked up or who are unable to access to their normal life or work during the time of COVID restriction period. That's why the Chinese news, Chinese propaganda missions are portraying the general situations based on the treatments of the Han Chinese, whereas they are covering or putting everything in secret what is happening to the Uyghur communities. But through the difficult channels, we are reaching their voices, showing the images of the people who are died, who are passing away, who are starving, who are unable to access for a number of weeks or number of months to the food, to the medications, to other means of support, which is demonstrating a true nature of the Chinese government's approaches on the Uyghur nations. This is a continuation of the genocide policies of the Chinese government since last 73 years' time. I can only say that, but this is a clear example the inhuman nature of the one particular state, one particular nation of the Chinese people, and one particular economy which is influenced on the globe, especially targeting the Muslim countries, whereas it is holding one particular large amount of Muslim populations in the tyrannic regime. That's why this is very unique to understand, specifically for the Muslim Ummah, Muslim nation countries or Muslim institutions to understand. This is nothing to do with the COVID restrictive measures. This is nothing to do with the current health safety measures. This is only specifically targeting the Uyghur communities to suffer, to continuously suffer, or to continue to be disconnected from the international communities or from rest of the Muslim Ummah, so they will become part of the forgotten history of the human societies. That's why we are trying to tell that the need for a more investigations to this matter, more level of engagement with the Uyghur communities, more direct streamlined support activities to the Uyghur communities living in East Turkestan by the international NGO, aid groups, or Muslim countries is must. Okay, so I have to mention one point that in recent months, which is last month, 32 Muslim countries representatives visited East Turkestan in the directions of the Chinese government. And what they said, everything has been taken place by the Chinese government is praiseworthy, and then they can remodel the shape how the Chinese government is managing the social stability, economic development, or political stability in the region. However, the core issue is here that the Muslim countries, the leaders of the countries, are unable to comprehend the real nature of the Chinese government, Chinese institutions, and the way of treatments in the last 73 years against one particular nation called East Turkestan, with a 35 million Muslim population, which is a stronghold of the Muslim Ummah in the East, which is an integral part of the Islamic nations. And they forgotten this, the fact that how we are suffering in the hands of the Chinese government, whereas the Muslim countries are getting a falsified narrative from the Chinese government in order to establish more strengthened diplomatic economic ties with the Muslim countries. That's why Muslim nations, leaders, or the institutions have to look into the different angle. They need to engage with the Uyghur community living in overseas. They need to listen to the testimonies of the Uyghur families. They need to see the images where the families are torn apart, where the 500,000 children become apostated. This is a crucial matter. How can a Muslim leader can sleep where the 500,000 Muslim children collectively apostated and they are fallen, dragged into a hellfire? We need to humanize the matter to the leaders of the Muslim countries. We need to raise this awareness from the perspective that Islam is largely targeted by the Chinese government, and Islamophobia is existing only against the Uyghur people of East Turkestan, whereas the Chinese government is showing another narrative to treat the Chinese Hui Muslims in a decent way, to show that global communities, or at least the Muslim countries, how they are integrating the Muslim communities so in better way. We need to differentiate the issues, but we need to also give Muslim nations a good lessons through the experiments, through the tragic the genocide experience of the Uyghur nations in the last 72 years' time. So we will give a good lesson to the Muslim countries. China came with the soft words, diplomatic relationship, economic relationship to East Turkestan 72 years ago. But today, China has made this region a total dystopian state by the massive investment by the Chinese money, by the influx of the Han Chinese migration, by the political corruptions into our system, by the destructions of our religious, social, cultural identities. The similar approaches are happening against the Muslim countries today. Look into the example of Afghanistan. The Beijing has established a new Kabul city, whereas existence of all means of corruptions, all means of indecency, all means of the unethical, the way of life in the Muslim countries. The dealing with the Pakistan, they withdrew the power plant stations after the massive amount of engagement with the Pakistan. What about the other investment policies in other Gulf countries? We also need to warn through our experience. The Muslim countries should wake up, should be cautious about the Chinese approach, Chinese investment, Chinese relationship with their respective countries. Otherwise, we are having the exact same fate that our brothers and sisters of East Turkestan experienced in the last 72 years' time. Because we need to put this one into fact. So how many Muslim countries have diplomatic relations with China, and how many years they have been in diplomatic relationship with China, which is in communist China? This is everything happened after 1980s. It's only 30 years or 40 years time of engagement. But they have no sophisticated means of engagement or direct involvement of finding about how the Chinese government is doing the human rights treatments or treating against the Muslims or improving the status of the Muslims in China. China is one of the mostly Muslim populated country on earth, which is containing more than 150 million populations, which is second in number apart from Indonesia. That's why the Muslim countries need to engage more direct way to put pressure on the Chinese government to improve the overall status of the Muslim communities, not only the Han Chinese or Hui Muslims, but also an important integral part of the Muslim Ummah, which is known as East Turkestan, because we have the deepest connection to the Ummah. We are the painful part of the Ummah today. As Brother Hamza stated, nothing stays on top agenda of the Muslim Ummah than East Turkestan. Not because of me as an Uyghur speaking like this, but from the all metrics. So, social instability, political the suppressions, the economic marginalizations, the demographic change, also the other elements that the vast level of human rights violations committed by the Chinese state is well proven by the international communities. Whereas the Western countries are proving the evidence and they're stretching their hands to support the Uyghur communities, on another hand, the Muslim Ummah, or the collectively rejecting the notions that East Turkestan is suffering. So how we change this dynamic? It is in the hands of the Muslim countries, institutions, and the public. And I believe that the awareness is key and the crucial point of this. Plus, that we also need to resource the campaign process against the Muslim countries and Muslim institutions by all means, mobilizing all available resources in our hands, institutional level, individual level, or government level of engagement, to reach our voice, to make this ummah to realize the real threat posed by the Chinese government, not only against the East Turkestani people, rather against the whole Islam, the ideological Islam, the principle Islam, which is today there is. I give you another example. The Quran is burned in Europe, then the whole world is stood up. They pour into the streets. They boycott the country's products. All right. They insult our respected Prophet ﷺ. What happened? The country is immediately shaken up for one night. But today, millions of Quran are burned. Millions of Muslims are killed. Women are assaulted, raped. Children are apostated by force, by genocide policies. Then there is death silence in the Muslim communities around the world. This is a questionable. Where is our ethic? Where is our akhlaq? Where is our responsibility on this issue? So I realize that we need to connect our cause to the core national interest of the Muslim countries, core value of the Muslim Ummah's Islamic identities, to link them up, to make sure that they take this matter as their own agenda, as their own committed responsibilities to make this completely change or alter immediately. Otherwise, we're going to witness another history, which is we always remember during the time of Musa, during the time of Jesus, peace be upon him, this happened, that happened, and we don't want to listen that within the presence of the 57 strong Muslim nations who coordinated OIC has witnessed the total destructions of one particular Muslim nation called East Turkestan. We don't want to hear this. This is our cause. In summary, what we need to do, we want our stories to be told. And we want our stories to be told by the Muslim nations, Muslim communities, and Muslim individuals. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. So, Brother Nurmuhammad, you engaged, you outlined a good and concise roadmap for Muslim nations in particular and institutions who need to engage with Uyghur communities overseas, need to speak to Uyghurs directly, need to be wary of the slow colonization of China, for want of a better word, of large swathes of infrastructure in Muslim majority countries. But I want to ask Amal and Hamza, for example, in your experience, what has been the stumbling block or the obstacle for the general masses of Muslims, either in Muslim majority countries, which you frequently, Hamza, you frequently visit and engage with, or even Muslims in Western countries, Amal? What has been your response or the stumbling block, the obstacle for Muslim masses, general masses, Muslim civil society, taking heed and speaking up about this? Let's say from Amal first, please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Brother Muhammad. That was well said. And I just want to say, like regarding the Starvation Genocide, my first my first kind of reaction to it, like la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I just like want to say, may Allah give patience and protect our Uyghur brothers and sisters, because as a Yemeni, looking at the pictures of famine in Yemen was really painful. But looking at pictures of Uyghurs, of kids crying, of parents saying like la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, kind of like, feeling that helpless feeling of what can I do to save my child. But I think it's even like Brother Hamza was saying, the situation in East Turkestan and that our Uyghur brothers and sisters are facing is just way more devastating, because it's starvation in the shadows. It's suffering and genocide while being in this media blackout. And that's kind of, to answer your question, Brother Salman, that is our main obstacle here in the US. I remember when we first started posting on our social media and talking to our Uyghur friends and just like doing the basic research on what's happening. We used to get messages from our from Pakistani or like from different Muslims in the US and abroad, telling us, oh, how much is the CIA paying you? Oh, how much, like kind of saying that or assuming that. Exactly. But I think, I mean, obviously, this is kind of the more radical or more extreme viewpoints, but there is a sense of hesitation from Muslims in the West and Muslims all throughout the world of believing our Uyghur brothers and sisters, of accept, like acknowledging the genocide as it's happening. And maybe part of it is that guilt and like not wanting to feel that we are complicit by our side. But I think also another part is the fact that Muslim nations are silent, because right now, kind of, giving the history of the West and Muslim countries, there isn't a lot of trust, in the Western sources, especially as sometimes they are in parallel with their own political interests. Just as we've seen like in the Iraq war and the Afghanistan invasion and so on. And so there is definitely that hesitancy of how can we trust that the U.S. is passing these laws, that Trump or Biden or all these politicians in Congress are actually saying the truth versus kind of their anti-China interests. But inshallah, like I hope there is, I have hope, and alhamdulillah, like I think that now more and more Muslims in the US and in the West, and inshallah even soon throughout the world, are are waking up. We are opening our eyes and listening to our Uyghur brothers and sisters. And even if we don't trust, the videos of our Uyghur brothers and sisters talking, or like the voices, then hopefully, like now with the UN report that was published uh, August 31st, saying that it is crimes against humanity, and also Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, like all of these, I guess, more credible in the eyes of some people, sources are also saying the same things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. So Hamza, in your experience, you've probably come across lots of Muslims doubting testimony and stuff like that.
Yes.
What's usually your response?
Yeah, so because my social media following is relatively large, I have had people basically challenging the narrative and actually saying things that I have zero tolerance for, and for a right reason. Because I think the Muslim community, wherever they are, in whatever country they belong to, they have to realize that when you have mass testimony of Muslims who are citing oppression, torture, rape, discrimination, genocide, beatings, and it's not just one or two testimonies, it's multiple testimonies from even practicing Muslims, and these Muslims have not necessarily met each other, right? For you to reject that, it is one of the most gross injustices and immoralities that you can do as not only a human being, but as a believing Muslim. If we accept the single testimony, many of the madahib, for example, the schools of thought, accept a single testimony for the end of Ramadan, when one person looks at the sighting of the moon, that is enough. Yeah, if you take that view. And that is an act of ibadah. And we know affirming the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshipping Allah is the greatest good. And we know shirk is the greatest evil. And this one sighting of the moon can stop Ramadan. What about the multiple testimonies of practicing people? And these people have not necessarily met each other. They haven't colluded together. For you to reject that, wallahi, it's one of the most ridiculous things. And let's just be very honest. This is not a majority of people, but it's a good substantial number of people. And they're infected with the ideology of ethno-nationalism, an ethnic-centric approach to the ethics. You get this from people from Pakistan or other countries, and just because there is an economic agreement and there is this Sino-colonialism going on, then they think now we just have to throw our Uyghur brothers and sisters under the bus. We have to support genocide, or we have to ignore it or lie about our brothers and sisters just for the sake of what? Some more bread? And for you to have a port? I mean, let's think about it. I mean, this kind of utilitarian, consequentialist understanding of morals and ethics is ridiculous. We have to understand that some actions in and themselves cannot be justified irrespective of the so-called maslaha or mafsada, the so-called the benefits or the harms. We have to be principled, and we have a duty to Allah. What does Allah say? Persecution is worse than death. Allahu Akbar. Do you know what this means, brothers and sisters? This means that you're forcing Muslims to leave the religion, oppressing them to leave the religion. Worse than death. 500,000 children at least removed away from the arms of their families and their parents. 500,000. What about the over 1 million in concentration camps to infect them with an alien ideology? Allah is saying, forget me, forget the panel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, Al-Alim, Al-Hakim, the knowing, the wise, he's saying persecution is worse than death. And yet we're treating this like, a utilitarian calculus, the benefits outweigh the harms. No, there are some lines we have to draw. And so one of the obstacles is this ethno-nationalism that we have to stop. And by the way, have a longer memory than just 30 years. You think if it doesn't suit the CCP, they're going to come and get you? Of course they will. You think they're not going to balkanize Pakistan, for example? If the balkanization of Pakistan is in the interest of the CCP, they will do it. They will do it. So don't think this is in your benefit. This is a short-term strategic move. You're not thinking long-term. Muslims must think long-term. So combined with the Islamic ethics and values and long-term thinking, this is the wrong approach, just to ignore it just for the sake of some kind of utilitarian ethno-nationalist calculus. Haram alaik, honestly. That's the first part. The second obstacle is a sense of hopelessness. Brother, wallahi, we have to listen to this, yeah? Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 214, do you think you're going to go to paradise without being tested? And Allah talks about the messenger and the companions. They were tested so severely, they said, when will Allah's help come? Apologies. Then Allah says, indeed, Allah's help is qareeb, is close. Look at the connection here. Just because there's genocide going on, don't think that it's hopeless, because Allah is linking severe test to the closeness of His victory. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to act. We have mass raping of our sisters. We have Sino-colonialism around the Muslim world. We have the concentration camps. We have the murders. We have the missing Uyghurs. We have torture. We have abuse. I personally interviewed 2 Uyghurs recently. It's been filmed and we're going to upload them shortly, inshallah. Sheikh Adil, for example, and a sister, both in prison. Sheikh Adil for 15 years in prison just for being a practicing Muslim. He was tortured and abused. He wasn't allowed to pray. He had to pray with his eyes. He got beaten for trying to do wudu. He was heavy blocks of cement. He had to stay upright for around 14 hours every day for around a period of time, for around 24 days or something. These are testimonies of practicing Muslims. We have a duty and obligation to help them. But yet, at the same time, we have to frame this from the perspective of our metaphysics. Allah is saying, this test is severe, but also Allah's help is close. So don't allow the test to push you away from Allah's help. Get involved now. So those are the 2 obstacles sometimes, the ethno-nationalism and also the sense of hopelessness. Remember, brothers and sisters, wallahi, Allah doesn't break His promises. If you believe Allah breaks His promises, you can't even be a Muslim. Allah does not break His promise. So the success will come, it's an inevitability. So our job is, do we want to be part of that change? Do we want to be manifestations of Allah's mercy and His guidance and the victory? That's what we need to make. And we need to be brave about that, yeah? So these are the 2 obstacles that I think can be overcome with these type of narratives, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair for that, Hamza. Powerful. If you just joined us, brothers and sisters, you're watching The Voice of Istiqlal, a program where we have conversations on the Uyghur issue. We invite Uyghurs and scholars, academics, activists, experts on the Uyghur cause, or people who are working in that field. We have with us 3 very special guests: Nurmuhammad Majid, who's the president of East Turkistan Human Rights Watch Association. We have Hamza, Andreas, Tzortzis, who is a writer, researcher, and founder of the Sapience Institute. And we have Amal, Altareb, who is the executive director and co-founder of Free Uyghur Now. We've had a lot of heartbreaking, testimony and news about what's happened to Uyghur brothers and sisters in East Turkestan, particularly the so-called Starvation Genocide under the cover of COVID restrictions, a genocidal level of starvation and restriction and of people's ability to move and buy food and get necessary life-saving or life-sustaining medication and food and water and so forth. Unfortunately, we're running short of time now. We've had lots of important messages said, but I wanted each guest now to just maybe give a 1-minute summary or a 1-minute message actually to the 30 plus Muslim delegation or envoys that came from 30 plus Muslim majority countries. We mentioned, Mr. Nurmuhammad mentioned a few minutes ago then Shortly after, the day after, in fact, there was demonstrations and actions in 10 plus cities around the world under the Stand for Uyghurs campaign. The Chinese Communist Party had invited 32, I think, envoys from 30 Muslim majority countries to have a guided tour around East Turkestan, where they were shown sanitized and a kind of pageantry to show that Muslims are having a great time. There's no such thing as genocide and so forth. What is, maybe 1 minute, your message each to these Muslim envoys, these Muslim majority countries now, briefly, in 1 minute to wrap up, inshallah. Brother, let's start off with Amal, inshallah, your message.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's again like just really shameful. But my message is to the Yemen delegation. So as a Yemeni American myself, and especially as we have seen the last 8 years of war and the man-made devastation that Yemen and Yemenis have been facing, and yet we have the Yemen envoy applauding China for their intentionally made genocide and continuous oppression of our Uyghur brothers and sisters. So I just want to say it is truly shameful, and may Allah guide you to the right path, and may you represent what Yemenis are actually what Yemenis actually believe and want you to do, which is stand in solidarity with our Uyghur brothers and sisters.
Jazakallah khaira. And Hamza?
Yeah, I would just say shame on you. Shame on you. Like how dare you? With the position of authority that you have a massive responsibility given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're in a position of authority, in a position of power, relative power. And you're there and you're ideologically naive, intellectually naive. You're just redundant of the key faculties that you should be displaying to basically try and do something for your brothers and sisters. And you've sold your brothers and sisters for a small price. So the only thing we can really say is shame on you. And if you don't fix up and you don't change, then that's going to be part of your own destruction, if not here, but in the hereafter. And there's going to be voices that are growing, and there's going to be a movement that's going to challenge you and hold you to account and show how cowardly you've been, how shameful you've been, and how ideologically naive you've been as well. And look, at the end of the day, how long are you going to live? Another 10 years? Another 20? Another 30? What you want to go to Allah with on the Day of Judgment? Really? Are you sure that the utilitarian ethnocentric calculus is enough to save you on the Day of Judgment? I don't think so. So there's some deep dunya and spiritual consequences, and severe spiritual consequences, that you have to take very seriously. And look, I echo the dua, the supplication of our sister. May Allah guide you and protect you and actually make you a voice for the truth, and make you a voice for justice. And if you do that, if you do turn the tables and change, we'll support you 100%. We'll be your shield. We'll be behind you, and we'll be in front of you. So it's not us and them. We want you to be the optimized version of yourselves. But at this present state, it's very shameful. But you can make that transformation, and we'll be behind you, and we'll be in front of you, helping you and supporting you in this cause, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. And finally, Mr. Nurmuhammad Majid, President of the East Turkestan Human Rights Watch Association. What is your final message to these 32 odd envoys from Muslim majority?
My direct message to all Muslim countries who are the members of the OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference. You all countries have listened to the narrative from the Chinese government. You have witnessed the false narrative has been guided under the falsified agenda of the Chinese government. Now, I challenge you to invite the leaders or representative or the members of the Uyghur community to the OIC to listen to our plight directly. If we are not able to persuade or touch your heart, then we are prepared to accept what you call us. This is the first message. Secondly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly says in the Quran, O believers, Do not fall to the deceptions of shaitan. You have been visiting the region with the deceptive guidance of the Chinese government because you only visited certain designated places. And I have a photograph to show that you have eaten the haram food which is provided by the Chinese government. You are only consuming the products made in China because with the halal sign only. But you are neglecting the fact that how much they are oppressing one whole nation, covering the fact, the real evil nature of this Chinese government, Chinese population, and the Chinese economy. This is my direct message to the Muslim public again to say, come to us. Afshu salam, which is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Please commonalize your greetings. Come to greet us. Come to meet us. Come to listen to us. Then if you're not persuaded, if you are not touched, if you are not able to tolerate our pain, then we are happy to stand alone. But we believe Allah is with the Mazlumeen. Allah is with the people who are calling for the justice. We, lastly, but not least, I call all the Muslim country leaders, all the Muslim countries' populations, institutions, and the governments, stand with justice. Stand with justice, or you wait the injustice to suppress you one day. Thank you.
Powerful words from our guests. I'd like to thank you all. Amal Altareb, Executive Director and Co-founder of Free Uyghur Now. Hamza Andreas Tzortzis, writer, researcher and founder of Sapience Institute. And Brother Nurmuhammad Majid, President of East Turkistan Human Rights Watch Association. And I'd like to thank you at home for watching. You've been watching the Voice of Istiqlal. I've been your host, Salman, and until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.